there, I wanted to flee. I did not want to see this. Would I cut and run, or would I deal with the responsibility of being there with a camera?
In one of the world's countless crisis areas, surrounded by suffering, death, violence, and chaos, photographer James Nachtwey searches for the picture he thinks he can publish. A film about a committed, shy man who is considered one of the bravest and most important war photographers of our time, but hardly fits the cliché of the hard-boiled war veteran.
There are many difficult jobs that you could do, but being a war photographer has to be one of the hardest. Normal men with a camera in incredibly unusual situations, brutal situations, horrible situations that could easily leave them being scarred for life. Welcome to this revision video then for the poem War Photographer by Carol Ann Duffy. When you're being examined, the examiner will be looking for 3 criteria: understanding what the poem's about, language, form and structure, and then the context. Without further ado, let's focus on the poet themselves. This is Carol Ann Duffy. Much of Carol Ann Duffy's poetry explores themes like memory, identity, morality and conflict, often giving a voice to people with perspectives that are not usually heard. And I think War Photographer is a really good example of that. Duffy was inspired by her friendship with Don McCullum and Philip Jones Griffiths, both famous war photographers who documented harsh realities of war. Carol Ann Duffy herself was born in 1955 in Glasgow, Scotland. She became the UK's first female poet laureate in 2009. Often, in that role, she wrote poems that were deliberately controversial to force us to think about our lives and the lives of those around us. And I think War Photographer naturally fits that bill as we really think about the effect of war. Let's now take a look at the poem itself, printed on the left-hand side, and a film with visual imagery to help us understand what this poem might be about.
In his dark room he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red, and softly glows, as though this were a church, and he a priest, preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. A half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane, he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care.
When we look at the life of a war photographer, I think it's important that we look at what they have to go through and what they have seen, and indeed the effect of that it has on their subconscious.
Being a war photographer means making some difficult decisions. So what kind of conflicting decisions does somebody in this job have to make? Well, first of all, a war photographer is the only person who can report the truth of war. They have a responsibility to the people who are suffering to validate it. Governments will often try to deny the atrocities that are taking place, and so photographic evidence of these atrocities validate them. There's the potential that maybe these photographs will encourage people or force the authorities to get involved and help. And it could be that to be a war photographer, you enjoy the chaos and the adrenaline. There are, of course, some difficult decisions that come with it. So for example, if you want to show the truth, you can't help the people you are photographing, no matter how horrific the situation they're in may be. You will then have to live with the guilt of this decision of not becoming involved. You will, of course, see things that will damage you emotionally, horrific things, and you will find it difficult to live a normal life outside of a war zone. For example, you find it challenging to interact with family and children and friends. Now, a major reason for this is something called PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. The NHS's definition of post-traumatic stress disorder is that it is a mental health condition caused by a traumatic experience. Symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder include flashbacks, nightmares, feeling very anxious, and having difficulty sleeping. The main treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder are antidepressants and talking therapies. Any situation that a person finds traumatic can cause post-traumatic stress disorder. Examples include a road accident, an assault, and childbirth. So it's clear to see that PTSD isn't something that just affects soldiers. It can affect anybody who sees or experiences something traumatic. And for these war photographers, they will be seeing traumatic and horrifying situations all the time.
When we look at some of the pictures that war photographers have to take, we can see images such as the black and white image you see in front of you. This is a small 8-year-old girl running from a napalm attack during the Vietnam War. As you can see, I blurred out some of the image as all her clothes have been burnt away, as has most of her skin. She runs screaming from the war zone, desperate for life. The war photographer standing in front of her with a camera, taking the shot for the world to see. This is an iconic image taken from this war that's a powerful symbol of the effect of war on innocent civilians. This really influenced global public opinion and anti-war movements, particularly in the US, which led to the end of the Vietnam War. So this is seen as one of the most iconic war photographs ever taken. Now let's move to the poem itself and a breakdown of its language and structure to really reinforce Duffy's message. First, as always, we look at the start of the poem and the language and structure used there. The beginning of the poem uses enjambment between the first 2 lines, mimicking the flow of thought and creating a reflective tone. The poem opens with a calm, quiet setting, the dark room, contrasting with the violent, loud settings the war photographer usually works in. The dark room itself suggests isolation, a sense of mourning, a sombre, almost sacred atmosphere, like a confessional or a tomb, as if he's contemplating the world he has seen through his camera lens while developing his pictures. We then have a reference to ordered rows. This juxtaposes the chaos of war with the control and precision of the dark room. This echoes the image of gravestones or bodies laid out after a conflict, subtly linking death and remembrance. The only light being red and softly glowing reflects relief and from emotional exhaustion after being in such dangerous, chaotic war zones. It shows that the war photographer is truly processing his mental and physical emotions, perhaps in solitude, able to really think about what he's doing. The spools of suffering obviously suggest what he's thinking about. There is a Bible reference at the end of the first stanza. All flesh is grass. This is a Bible referencing, suggesting that bodies are nothing and that life is just a small part of existence. From dust, and then we become dust. The idea of our life being inconsequential over the millions of years of existence. We now look at the middle section of the poem and some of the language and structure used there. It begins with a short, simple sentence which sounds blunt or factual in its tone. This highlights the photographer's professionalism, but also emotional detachment, or perhaps a need to suppress the emotions that he finds himself battling throughout his career. There is a contrast between the past and the present in the second stanza. He was emotionally steady in the war zone, but is now affected by the safety of the dark room. You'd expect fear in danger, but it's in reflection that trauma hits him the hardest, suggesting delayed emotional response or PTSD as outlined earlier in this video. We can see from the wording there, his hands, which did not tremble, then seem to now. In war, he holds his camera steady, but when he's at home developing his pictures, he finds himself shaking due to the trauma he's experienced. The solutions is almost ironic, revealing both the photographic chemicals and potential answers to the world's suffering. The slop has a harsh, careless sound, suggesting discomfort or messiness, perhaps reflecting the inner turmoil the war photographer is feeling. We notice each line is jammed between the lines, reflecting the ongoing emotional impact of his experiences, though thoughts spill over, mirroring his disturbed state of mind. The tight stanza structure, 4 lines and a regular rhyme, continues, symbolising the photographer's effort to contain his emotions and bring structure to the chaos. The last line here, sought approval without words to do what someone must, suggests a moral dilemma, photographing people in their worst moments. The phrase, without words, implies an unspoken understanding, or perhaps guilt, that permission was not truly granted. Maybe the victims didn't want their picture taken and didn't have the chance to protest. This raises questions about the ethics of photojournalism. Is it right to document tragedy, even if it's necessary? Is it right we take pictures of people in their worst moments when they might just want to be left alone? Now we move to the end of the poem, the last stanza. Black and white in line 1 refers to the photographs, like the one we saw on screen earlier, but also symbolises the moral clarity of suffering and the contrast between life and death. The word 100 exaggerates the scale of the suffering, showing how each death must be filtered out by the photographer in order to function. The use of enjambment continues, mimicking the flow of thoughts and the disconnection between each part of the world involved: the war zone, the editor, the reader who's reading the newspaper, and of course the photographer himself. Sunday's supplement implies a casual consumption of the magazine or newspaper being read. The horrors of war are slotted alongside lifestyle and fashion. This critiques how war is packaged as entertainment or distant news. There is bathos and irony in the last line. This contrasts the gravity of war with the reader's comfortable routine. Duffy uses a mocking tone to highlight the reader's shallow response. A moment of feeling is quickly forgotten amid leisure. We look at these photos in this newspaper or this news supplement. We cry and feel sad about the people in the photos, and then we turn to the next page and read the next article. That implies then the emotions of the reader really don't last all that long. The poem ends in rhyming couplets, tears, beers, wear and care, that provide a neat finish, but also create an unsettling contrast to the unresolved emotional and moral tension of the poem. The final couplet is especially biting and direct, leaving the reader with a strong impression of indifference and detachment, as he stares impassively where he earns his living and they do not care. The last two lines, impassively, shows the photographer is now emotionally numb, perhaps due to the trauma or acceptance of futility. After all, he's a photographer. He can't do anything about the wars he's seen. The contrast between he and they shows the isolation he feels, detached from the rest of the world. No one else truly understands what he's gone through and what he's seen. It is blunt and cynical. They do not care. Sums up the poem's harsh critique of public apathy. Now let's move then to finalising or summarising the poem. Who is the poem about? A war photographer developing his last set of photos. What? He tries to forget what he's seen and heard and thinks about the people who see his photos or read them. Why was it written? The message of the poem. Carol Ann Duffy wrote War Photographer to explore the emotional and moral struggles faced by those who document horrors of war. She also critiques society's indifference to global suffering and how quickly such tragedies are forgotten by the public. Now we're going to move to 3 key quotes for you to revise to put on your revision cards. The first one, as you can see on the left-hand side, and the marking criteria on the right. Around the outside, you're going to see some ideas that you could write about this quote. Please pause your video now to make notes on these ideas. Notice each one is quite long. No single word answers here in order to pass a GCSE. Quote number 2. Once again with its answers round the outside. And moving to quote number 3. Hopefully those notes will really help you in your revision. Now we're going to look at an essay structure for this poem. First of all, you can see on screen a range of advice, step by step, step 1 to 9, of how you could arrange a paragraph. You'd follow each one of these steps for one paragraph of your response, once from the start, once from the middle, and once indeed for the end. Each one of those steps would form one sentence of your response. Now let's see a grade 4 example of how some of those steps might be followed. This is an introduction paragraph to your response. You'll notice immediately it is 3 sentences long, and it would achieve a grade 4 at GCSE, which shows understanding of the poem and engage with its key ideas. As you read this response, you can see the writer is referred to by name, and the candidate has also talked about why the poem was written. It isn't overly clever, it doesn't give alternatives, it doesn't show necessarily deeper understanding, but it does show a clear understanding of the poem. Now let's move to the start of the poem, indeed again at grade 4 level. The marking criteria for this would link strongly to language, form and structure. As you read through this response, you can see how many quotes are used and indeed how much is said about those quotes. You can see each one is explained in about a sentence, and each one is trying to show the effect of the line. There are different references to the reader, such as the word us, and you can see 1 or 2 pieces of technical language or subject terminology, such as the word metaphor and sibilance in this response. Once again, it's quite minimal in terms of how much it explains, but does use quotes and does explain them. This then would be a grade 5 response to the start of the poem. Immediately, any student will be able to see that it's much longer, it's a bit more detailed, and goes on to explain its points. It does also include a bit of work on tone, as well as looking at some of the structure of the poem as well, and goes on to explain those. By moving through this video, looking at the 4 and looking at the 5, you can see the clear difference between a low grade pass and a higher grade pass at GCSE. Thank you very much then for listening to this revision guide to Carolyn Duffy's The War Photographer. See you next time.